Everyone. It's really great to see you all here, and I'm super excited to talk about the awesome legislative stuff that MSCAC and CCAN have going on. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a little bit of a presentation prepared that some students from MSCAC are going to present with me. So give me 1 second. Okay, here it is. So welcome to our event. We're going to talk a lot today about our bills and how the legislative process is going to be different this year because of COVID. So to start, just the agenda, we're going to talk about MSCAC's legislation, the Future Act, CCAN's legislation, how the legislative process works in Maryland, and how you can make your impact this session. To start, we're going to do a quick introduction for all the presenters. I'll go first. My name is Reese Barrett. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm the campaign coordinator for the MaryPIRG, oh my gosh, MaryPIRG Student Climate Action Coalition, or MSCAC. And I'm really excited to be here today to share our work with you all. The other presenters, you guys can just jump in whenever you're ready.
I could go next. So my name is Rajul, he, him pronouns. I'm also at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I'm the recruitment coordinator for MSCAC.
Hi, my name is Erin Kozlowski. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior at UMBC and one of the UMBC delegates for MSCAC.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. So to start, what is MSCAC? Well, at UMD, MaryPIRG is a student advocacy organization that covers a wide range of topics. And MSCAC is kind of the environmental branch of that organization. And so we include students from all across Maryland. We have over 11 schools represented in our coalition, which is really awesome. And I see a lot of you here tonight. And our goal for this session is to pass a carbon neutrality commitment bill. So we have that bill written, and we're currently working on the advocacy behind it. And we're really excited for a session to start tomorrow so we can jump in to that.
Okay, so a little bit about what we have done so far. Oh, could you go to the next slide? Okay, so we have recruited students from over 11 universities in the state of Maryland, and that's about 250 student supporters. We've also collaborated with organizations from the state of Maryland like CCAN, and we've held several educational events. So we've had a couple lobby trainings, and we also had an environmental justice panel where we had people involved with that come in and talk about their experience. And we've also had youth leadership development. We've also gotten letters of support from SGAs from UMD, St. Mary's, Johns Hopkins, Salisbury, and Morgan State. And we've also worked with offices of sustainability from colleges across the state. We've met with several state legislators, and we also have a Senate and House sponsor.
So to start, because we know that what we're doing is a little bit technical sometimes, we're going to define some terms that are going to be really useful when we're talking about our bill. The first is carbon neutrality. Merriam-Webster says it's having or resulting in no net addition of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Basically, it just means that you cancel out any of your emissions so that you reach net zero. So why carbon neutrality? Well, it's really an effective tool to fight climate change, which I'm sure if you're here, you know is a really, really serious threat facing our planet. And most universities right now don't have the infrastructure to go completely renewable. So by achieving carbon neutrality, it'll establish the state of Maryland as a leader in climate action. And public universities are in this really cool position to be role models for the state. We have students who are, the future of our state. Young people are going to be the most affected by climate change. And then we also have all these really awesome researchers and academics that have really pushed climate science forward. So if anybody is going to go and be really progressive on these issues and again, be a role model, universities are the best place to start.
Okay, so some more terms. So carbon offsets. So those are essentially just projects that cancel out the emissions, and we can make sure that they're doing what they're doing through offset verification, which is the process that ensures that the offsets are working and doing what they're supposed to. So an additionality is when an offset is canceling out emissions that it wasn't really supposed to, and it's canceling out more. And some examples of carbon offsets are reforestation, renewable energy sources, and making buildings more energy efficient. So there's also 3 scopes. So scope 1 is direct emissions. So this is fossil fuels at your university is burning directly. So like an on-campus power plant or like buses from the university. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, and this would be energy that the university is purchasing like from the grid. And scope 3 is also indirect emissions, but that's more further out. And it's just emissions that result from university activities. So it could be from people commuting to and from campus, airplane emissions, and waste processing.
So our main goal as a coalition right now is to pass our bill, which, as Reese mentioned, is called the Future Act. And we've been working on the draft all summer, and we actually just got it back from the Department of Legislative Services today. So we're really excited about that. It's like getting really official. So we're going to talk about the bill. So as we kind of mentioned, the main crux of our bill is to get all four-year public colleges in Maryland, which includes all schools in the USM and then also Morgan State and St. Mary's College, to achieve carbon neutrality on a phased timeline. So the first section of our bill is the timeline for carbon neutrality. So as we talked about, Rachel just explained the emissions. So scope 1 and 2 emissions, we're saying they need to be neutral by 2025. And then scope 3 emissions, neutral by 2035. So a lot of schools have already committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, but we know that that's not soon enough. So we want to create like a really doable timeline that is still like aggressive in terms of fighting climate change, but we want to be like realistic. So that's why I have the timeline. And then, so basically we want to not just encourage schools to purchase offsets, because that's kind of like a cheap way out. It's like canceling out emissions. We want them to really reduce their emissions first. So it just make some suggestions for that. And then, these are just, we define the scopes because not everyone's familiar with those terminology. So we just define them.
Yeah, sorry, Erin, I flipped the slide too soon, but what Erin was talking about with there being lots of critiques of offset projects for being the easy way out really hit home with us as a coalition. And so we established some offset requirements that would basically make sure that universities are purchasing offsets that would align with our values as a coalition and really give back to the state of Maryland and the people in the area, or also have an environmental justice impact, because as a coalition, again, one of our values is that we recognize that climate change affects people unequally, and we wanted to do something that, like, I guess, codified that or put that into legislation. So this timeline is also phased in, and it just establishes requirements for what offset projects that our coalition and we think students would value most. And then if universities choose to have offsets outside of these this scope, then the university's SGAs must help approve those offsets. So it's about including the student voice. And then more on environmental justice offsets, we had to define what we thought, or what we researched and found out that an environmental justice offset was. Essentially, it's an offset that benefits a community that's designated as an environmental justice community. So again, one of those communities that feels that unequal impact of climate change. In Maryland, environmental justice communities are mapped on the environmental justice screening. And this is like a screenshot of what that looks like. So the darker communities are environmental justice communities. And there's also a tool that does that on a national level. So we're going to use those to define like what type of impact or what counts as an environmental justice offset.
So for offset verification, we are requiring that it's verified through either the gold standard, VCS peer review, or any other carbon accounting methodology that is already approved by the state of Maryland. And we also want the methodology to also include additionality standards. And so for the Office of Sustainability, we want an existing faculty or staff right now to be appointed to track the progress made. And they should report to either a vice president or the president. And by 2023, we want one or more like dedicated person to be taking up that position. And they will also report to either the VP or the president. And the USM will work with these schools to share the resources, practices, and methodology to execute their plans. And we also want all of the offices to meet quarterly to share just a little bit about their progress. And we also want them to make an annual report to the MGA, again, talking about progress on their goals.
So I know that was a lot of information very quickly, but basically to recap, the major points are we want carbon neutrality for all Maryland public colleges by 2035, and the timelines are scope 1 and 2 by 2025. And then on another timeline, we want the offsets to increasingly be in-state in the Chesapeake watershed or benefiting environmental justice projects. And if those aren't possible, we want those alternatives to be approved by SGAs at the schools that are purchasing the offsets. We want the offsets to be verified to make sure that they're legitimate. We want all schools to have an Office of Sustainability by, I think, 2023, we said. And then we want those offices of sustainability to collaborate and be held accountable by making those reports to the MTA. So that's our bill.
Awesome. So I hope that you guys learned a little bit today and are interested in what we're doing. And I think we're going to stop here and take one question. Is that right, Emily?
Yes, that is correct. So if folks have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we will, I think folks, we didn't remember to tell folks that we were going to take questions. That's my bad. So if you don't have time to type out your question, we'll just make sure to circle back when folks have put some questions in. So yeah, if you have questions about this bill, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we will make sure to take time to take those. So for now, let's move on to talking about CCAN's bill. And when I'm done, I'll just make sure to check if there's questions about the MSCAC bill as well. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Great. All right. Okay, and let me also say we'll take a question about the MSCAC bill after this presentation, as well as a question about the CCAN bill after we talk about the bill. Then we'll talk about the legislative process, and we'll take one question after that as well. So just be coming up with your questions as we go. All right, so if you've never heard of CCAN before, we are the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We're both a 501c3 and a 501c4. So we are a nonprofit organization dedicated solely to fighting climate change in the DC, MD, and VA region. So we have organizers here as well as in Virginia. We primarily work on state level legislation and local fossil fuel fights. And recently, because of just all of the changes, we are going to be taking on some federal work as well. So we're really known for bringing the grassroots to Annapolis and Richmond and using every tool available, from direct action to sitting down at the policy table. So we've worked on some really incredible campaigns, such as the Keystone XL pipeline. We were a really big force behind the fracking ban that we banned legislatively here in Maryland. Offshore wind, the Potomac pipeline, and most recently, one of our most recent wins was the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So we're really in a good position to talk about the legislative landscape in Annapolis. So really exciting work. I'm really happy to be part of it. So next, I'm going to talk really about our top priority bill, the Climate Solutions Now. The Climate Solutions Now Act of 2021. So this dovetails so perfectly with the MaryPIRG bill because we also have a goal of reaching net zero emissions. So the top headline of this bill is that we want to get the entire state of Maryland to 60% reduction below 2006 levels of emissions by 2030. And then net zero emissions statewide by 2045. So that is increasing our current goal up from 40% by 2030. And then we have kind of a vague 80% by 2050 goal that the legislature is not really held accountable to. And those goals are just absolutely not in line with what the current science says. So we're going to need to do everything we can to really conform to the recommendations from the main body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is really urging us to make these cuts as soon as possible. So this will get Maryland right there in line with the current science. In addition to that, it also makes sure that we don't have bad science in our climate plan. So unfortunately, the Maryland Department of Environment under Hogan has come out with some climate reports that just really don't reflect reality, including the idea that we can reduce emissions by widening highways. Yes, that was really in one of our climate plans one year. And it also, so it requires the use of best available science, including banning unproven carbon capture technology, which was also a major part of previous climate plans. And it also revises the way that we talk about methane in our state. You might know that methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas in the early stages of its life cycle. And so in order to appropriately account for those greenhouse gas impacts, we need to change the way we account for methane. So this bill will do that as well. We also, the clock is really ticking, and right now we have a major need to create jobs and really start taking steps to mitigate our emissions. So we will be taking several immediate high return on investment actions, such as planting 5 million trees by 2030. So that's 500,000 trees annually for the next decade. Making major increases to the Empower program, electrifying our state bus fleet, making sure that some state buildings, if they receive a certain percentage of funding, have to be net neutral, as well as other energy efficiency increases. So a lot of what Reese and others were talking about in their slides applies to the whole, the concept of getting Maryland to net zero as well. Next, we also really need to make sure that workers are protected as we are making this transition, right? So this bill will be creating a climate jobs work group that'll be part of, that'll have to report to the Maryland Department of Environment, that will include labor stakeholders. So representatives from, and this is written into the bill, representatives from the IBEW, the AFL-CIO, organizations that do registered apprenticeships and construction businesses, to make recommendations as we transition our economy, and especially to make sure that everybody is included. So not only displaced fossil fuel workers, but also veterans, people of color, and women who are typically left out of the renewable energy industry. And finally, as Reese mentioned, it is so important that as we're talking about climate change, that we're really making sure we take account of the disproportionate impacts that people experience from climate. So we'll be charging the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities, which is a part of the Maryland Department of Environment, with deciding a percentage of all future, on a percentage of all future climate spending that must go to environmental justice communities. And we don't actually have a definition for that in the state. So right now we're not at all keeping track of what that means or what communities are receiving at all. So we know we need to increase it. So that term will actually be defined along with stakeholders. So they'll be holding listening sessions. They'll have some parameters that they do have to fit, but they'll be doing these listening sessions to make sure that people who are potentially impacted by that definition are included in the process of creating it. And yeah, so then from here on out, all of our climate policies will have to invest in those communities. And I want to say that so we based this provision on a policy in New York State. They actually came out with a mandate of about 35 to 40%. We decided that we really wanted to leave that, creating that mandate, like determining what percentage that would be to the actual stakeholders involved. But in California, where they had a similar mandate, they actually set a baseline of 25%, and they regularly exceed that baseline because they find that when you actually invest in communities that are most strongly impacted, you get a higher return in terms of emissions reductions and general pollution reduction, which absolutely makes sense. All right, so that's the general overview. So I'm going to stop for a second and just take some questions. And I believe this first question is for MSCAC. So what considerations were taken into account when determining the timelines for accomplishments?
That's a great question. So essentially, like Emily said, we did a lot of looking into current goals that universities have, and then also like what the science says and where we need to be. And like we were talking about earlier, universities, we believe, really should be like out front on this issue. And so we added a really aggressive goals to our work to kind of prove that it can be done for other like parts of like the government, like public, oh my gosh, for other like people and organizations. So we are ahead of what the IPCC recommends, but that's kind of like the point of what we're doing, is to establish universities as leaders so that we can get everybody else on board after that.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and I'm going to take one question on the climate solutions now. Does the bill expect 60% reduction for the entire state of Maryland or just state government entities? Does the bill do anything to push the private sector into climate action? So the 60% reduction will be for the entire state of Maryland. And yes, private entities will be included in that. So it is going to be a really big push, but yeah, doing business in Maryland will mean that you have to be part of that net zero vision. All right, great questions. All right, so next, I'm actually going to turn it over to my fabulous intern from the last semester, Natalia Whitman. So Natalia, go ahead and introduce yourself, and Natalia is going to tell us all about the Maryland legislative process.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalia. I use she, her pronouns, and like Emily said, I'm an intern with CCAN. So I'm going to go over just the basics of how the legislative process works. If you have any questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat and we'll try to answer them at the end, but hopefully it's pretty understandable. So the Maryland legislature, so Maryland's split up into 47 districts. Each district has 1 senator and 3 delegates. So it's 188 elected officials total. Some of the districts are split into sub-districts. So you can see on this map, the District 1 is split into 1A, 1B, and 1C. And in those areas, there is a delegate that's designated to each sub-district. And then in other districts, so you can see District 4 in orange at the top, isn't split up. And so all 3 delegates represent the whole district. And just for clarification, in Maryland, House members are called delegates. They're not called representatives, like at the national level. So this is just the core of what legislation is. Each piece of legislation has 1 or 2 sponsors, and these are legislators who introduce the bill into their chamber. Normally, the bill will have co-sponsors, so senators and delegates can sign on as co-sponsors to show support for the bill. Being a co-sponsor doesn't officially determine or say that you will vote for something, but it's normally a good indicator of how much support a piece of legislation will have. Co-sponsors will look different this year, and we'll talk more about the specifics of this year a little bit later on. Every piece of legislation has a fiscal note, which I will also talk about more in depth in a moment, and that explains in detail the cost of implementing a piece of legislation. And then there's the actual bill text, which is read and implemented throughout the legislative process. And on the Maryland General Assembly website, this at the bottom, the screenshot is what it looks like. And so speaking of the Maryland General Assembly website, if we go to the next slide, you can actually track pieces of legislation on their website. If you go under search and archives and into legislation, you can put in a bill number or search by committee or other things like that. And so you can see who is sponsoring and co-sponsoring your bill. You can read the full fiscal note if that is interesting to you. You can see what stage in the process it's in. and what legislators have voted for or against it, or what amendments have been brought to the floor and voted on. So all those kind of details are updated regularly, and you can see past pieces of legislation and ones that are currently being discussed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how bills actually move through the legislature. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye on this little chart on the side. I think it'll make it a lot easier to understand. So the first thing that happens is the first reading, and that's where all the bills are introduced at the beginning of session. And then all the bills are referred to a committee or to multiple committees. They can be dual assigned. And so the committees discuss the bills they've been assigned. They hear from citizens, lobbyists, local government representatives, and they also look at the fiscal note, so the cost of implementing the bill. And then they return for the second reading. They return to the floor with a recommendation. And so this is normally favorable, unfavorable, or favorable with amendment. If they are bringing any amendments to the floor, then those are voted on by the whole body. And then there's the third reading, which is the reading of the bill with any amendments that have been passed. If the piece of legislation makes it this far, then it gets passed to the second chamber and it goes through the exact same process. Amendments can be made at the second and the third reading and in committee in the second chamber. And then if there are amendments that are proposed in this second chamber, the bill will go back to the first chamber so that those amendments can be voted on. And then finally, if it makes it all the way through this entire process, it goes to the governor to either be passed or to be vetoed. And then the last two things I wanted to touch on are fiscal notes and cross-filed bills. So I just wanted to go a little more in depth on fiscal notes. So a fiscal note notes the monetary impact on the state and the local level and for small businesses and taxpayers. A large fiscal note isn't necessarily bad, but it does mean that it's going to need a lot more support to succeed. And it may need to be reviewed by the committees in each respective chamber that are responsible for the budget. And so the fiscal note is created by the Department of Legislative Services, and then advocates work to make sure that it's accurate and representative of the piece of legislation itself. And then the final thing are cross-filed bills. So I mentioned earlier that a bill gets introduced into one of two chambers, but it's actually possible to introduce the same bill into both chambers at the same time. And the reason why you would do this is because it increases the chance of it getting passed. And so this actually happened in 2019 with the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So you can see here that it was introduced into both chambers, and the Senate bill version made it all the way through. That's it for me.
Great, thank you so much. Really great job, Natalia. And I want to talk a little bit more about committee assignments because it's really, it's really like what determines a lot of the path of your bill. So these are the standing committees that we have on both sides here in Maryland. For environmental bills, for the most part, a lot of our bills are assigned to the 4 committees that are highlighted there. So economic matters in the House, they deal with utility regulation. So that's why a lot of the energy bills go through that committee. And then environment and transportation, obviously they deal with natural resources and transportation issues. So yes, a lot of environmental advocates are working in that as well. And I've done my best in this table here to make equivalencies between the different committees. As you can see, it's not exactly one-to-one. In some committees that deal with, like economic matters deals with issues that also appear in the finance committee, but also the EHE committee. So it's not exactly one-to-one, but they generally, if you go on the MGA website, they have a list of subjects that that committee covers. So you kind of know, based on what is in the content of your bill, what committee it'll likely be assigned to. And I also want to say that I did not highlight it, but the the Climate Solutions Now bill is dual assigned to budget and tax as well, because of just like fiscal note reasons. And there, the last 2 years, folks have, the Senate has been really specific about bills over a certain threshold going to budget and tax, because of last year, because they were working on the Kerwin Commission, which was a big education bill. And then this year, because we're definitely going to have a funny year for budget. So this basically explains the equivalencies. And yeah, and if you really want a deeper look at what subject matters these committees go through, you can find that on the website. All right. There we go. Okay. So just a little bit about 2021. Obviously, some things are going to be really different, and this is not comprehensive. There's a couple other things that aren't included here because things are kind of changing all the time. But we have been told that all committees will provide at least a 48-hour member and public notice as to which bills will be heard on the MGA website, which is really different from previous years. We'll have all of the office hours and contact info will be posted on their website, which normally they don't really include office hours. And there will be actually now live streaming of committee voting sessions, which is very, normally those were like kind of closed door affairs, which we're kind of excited to see that additional public transparency. So there are going to still be lots of opportunities for public input, even though you can't physically go to Annapolis. So you can upload written testimony to committees. You can also virtually testify in hearings via Zoom. There's kind of a longer process, but they have that really detailed out on the MGA website. But just something really important to note this year is that you have to register online in order to sign up to testify. Normally you would have to register like in person at the committee, but now you have to register online, and you must submit your testimony written and sign up to testify verbally 48 hours in advance. So that's definitely different from previous years. Normally it would be just the morning of that you would have to, and you'd have to get in your written testimony by like 1 p.m. Or 12 p.m. like when the hearing was happening. So they just are requiring a lot more notice. So if you are planning to advocate for a bill, just please be advised that you really want to get your testimony written in advance. And then also we know that the Senate testimony is going to be really limited in terms of verbal testimony. So in the Senate, now they're saying that you have to, they're going to accept four pieces of verbal testimony in favor, 4 against, and then 2 like favorable with amendments. So that's just really way less than normal. They do allow some exceptions if like the minority leader agrees that it's a topic that's necessary to hear a lot of testimony on. On the House side, they're limiting it to 50. So honestly, like in normal times, most bills don't have 50 people testifying. So that's a pretty acceptable limit. But yeah, it's just a lot more limited on the Senate side. I also want to say that something that's really different this year. So because of the Maryland Constitution, the legislators to do those full floor votes, which we have at certain points. So we have like bills introduced, and actually this year you're seeing a lot more pre-filed bills, which is something we left out of the slides. Bills are read and then they go to committee and then they come back to the floor for the entire body to vote on. All of those floor votes have to be in person due to the Maryland Constitution. The Attorney General of Maryland gave an opinion a little while ago that laws made in Maryland that weren't done in person could be legally, contested. So that really means that when the legislators are going to vote on the floor, they're risking their lives, basically. So they're really making a lot of effort to strictly limit floor debate. So that really gives an advantage to opposition. If people are really wanting to debate something on the floor, that means that that's just increasing that time that they're actually physically there in person. They have done some measures to make them social distance. They've moved some of the desks into the some of the other office buildings, but it's just a really different process this year. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that. Another thing that's a little different that doesn't affect too many legislators is they also limited the number of bills that each legislator can put in. So that's they're trying to pick, just a few issues to really focus on this year. And I will also let folks know that we're going to really have to make the case that climate can't wait this year. We're going to need to make a really big grassroots push. So really hope that this kind of gives you a perspective into the world that we're going to be working in. And, you will absolutely have opportunity to be an advocate. The last bullet point that I didn't get to is that you can make, you can have meetings by appointment via Zoom. That's something that we're planning to do as a big part of our lobby day. So, definitely take that. If you haven't done it before, take that time to try to really reach out to your legislator because they can't see you in person. Okay, so that gets us to grassroots advocacy. So I actually, that's my job. I am the grassroots coordinator at CCAN, and my whole job is all about bringing grassroots folks to Annapolis, virtually or otherwise. So there's a lot of ways that you can get your legislators' attention, including social media, generating phone calls, testifying at hearings, doing those lobby visits, joining us for virtual rallies, and helping us with generating media attention. So I'm actually going to do a poll on what kind of grassroots actions you guys are all most interested in. All right. So go ahead and let us know what kind of grassroots advocacy you're most excited to partake in. I'm seeing lobby meetings. That's really encouraging. I'll give folks another 30 seconds or so. Wow, lots of lobbyists. I'm really happy to see it. All right. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. Okay. So lots of lobbyists that we have on the call with us today. That is super encouraging. And I'm seeing a pretty good distribution at other things as well. So really great. And, with both CCAN and MSCAC, we're definitely prepared to give you everything you need to know to feel like a really strong advocate. So I'm really excited to see these results. Thank you, everybody, for partaking in that poll. Okay. So now we're going to take some questions. We'll actually just take one question for now on just general legislative process, and then we're going to just wrap up with kind of giving you all our contact information, and then we'll jump into questions once we have time at the end. Okay. What would be a big fiscal note for an environmental bill? Do environmental bills receive more scrutiny for their fiscal notes than other types of bills? So it really depends on the year. We do have some budget that's kind of dedicated to reducing emissions. So we by our participation in the regional greenhouse gas initiative. We do get that money goes into the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, which is then something that we are meant to reinvest in climate programs. So that, you know, depending on like what we're getting from that, that can have an impact. Yeah, it depends on the scope. And the other things that kind of go into the fiscal note are like small budget, small business impacts. You know, how much is it going to increase utility bills, that kind of thing. But then, you know, our job as advocates is to make the case that you know, it's less expensive in the long run to invest in climate programs than it is to you know, take no action. And do environmental bills receive more scrutiny for their fiscal notes? You know, I can't really answer that question. I think that a lot of progressive issues we're constantly told there's no money for it. But, you know, that's, you know, we tend to have money for other things that maybe aren't directly beneficial for people. So I think that this is an issue that I think it applies to all progressive issues and social programs, that we seem to have money for example, you know, tax breaks for high, you know, we actually found out recently that country clubs in Maryland do not pay property tax. So for some reason we have that, but we don't have money, and the money that we would be getting from those, it exceeds the entire like recreation budget in Montgomery County anyway. I looked at those, and it was just, so it's about kind of what our priorities are. And I think that's where we really need to do our job. And something I'll also say about fiscal notes is that if there's any econ majors out here, it's kind of more accounting than economics in some ways. That's not strictly true, but they don't do a lot of like for example, when we were doing the Clean Energy Jobs Act, right? There was a note about you know, what the impact was going to be to utility rates, but then so that was like a kind of a big conversation. But then at the same time, you know, if we reduce our emissions from, you know, dirty energy sources, how much more money are we saving from public health costs? And that's in the billions, right? So it's up to the advocates to really make those arguments. And that's not the kind of thing that's really included in a fiscal note. The fiscal note is more like budget impacts and, you know, some estimates on savings and opportunity costs, but it's not as heavily focused on that. Okay. So I'm going to move on to just make sure you all know about some important dates that are coming up this session. So the legislative session does start tomorrow. It's going to be an interesting day. And I mentioned before that we've kind of seen a lot of bills pre-filed this year because they've kind of, I don't know if I actually addressed this, but they have really limited the ability to get co-sponsors. And one of the reasons that you don't like pre-file a bill before the session is that usually when the bill is in a draft form is when you go collect co-sponsors literally by getting their signature. But because literally going and getting people's signature would be a huge risk right now, both sides have kind of you know, de-emphasized co-sponsors this year. In the Senate, we were able to get some on the Climate Solutions Now bill, but the House, they're just not doing co-sponsorship at all. So we actually do have a lot of bills that have been pre-filed as a result. It also, another reason is that they've allowed you to, like I mentioned, that they've capped the number of bills that each legislator can introduce. And they allowed legislators to do 5 additional bills if they pre-filed them. So that also increased the number of pre-filed bills that we're seeing. So a lot of bills have been in. Our bills are the Climate Solutions Now bill was not pre-filed because our Senate sponsor wanted to introduce it on the first day of session to kind of as a kind of tactic. to show that it was like to kind of set the tone for the session. But anyway, we get those bills in by January 22nd. If your bill is in, that is the bill guarantee date that your bill will get a hearing. On the 8th is it's the last day for Senate bills to be introduced and still get a hearing. So like by January 22nd, it's guaranteed, but you still have time to the 8th to get it in and still have a chance of getting a hearing. And then the 12th is the House bill introduction date. If they're not introduced by that date, they have to go through a special process to be allowed. So you want to get it in before then. An important date for you all to know as well is the week of February 22nd. CCAN is planning our lobby week. So that's when we're going to be scheduling meetings with legislators and hoping to get constituents to meet. It's normally a big event that we do in person. This year, obviously, it's going to be a little different, and we're spreading it out over a couple of days to give legislators a little bit more flexibility, but that's going to be a really important week for us. March 22nd is the day that all those bills do that changeover to the other side. So you really want to make sure that your bill has been voted on and has moved through the process before that date. And again, if you're late on that, it's not that your bill is dead, but then it has to go through a special process. It has to kind of pass like the rules committee, and you don't really want to be in that situation. We were in that situation with CJA. And it's just it's a bumpy process. And then April 12th, the session adjourns. So we have 90 days to do a lot of work. And that is provided that we don't have another situation like last year where session ended abruptly early due to COVID outbreak. So we've got a lot of work to do in just a short amount of time. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Reese to talk a little bit more about next steps with the MaryPIRG bill.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So the first bullet point, getting the bill draft back from the Department of Legislative Services, actually about 2 hours ago, I finally got it back. So we have our bill written in its official bill language right now, which is really exciting. It means we can move forward with trying to push it through the House and the Senate. We're also going to be working on speaking with people who are high up at the university system of Maryland because we anticipate them to be our main opposition to the bill. The interesting thing is that on principle, these people are, educators. A lot of them are really highly educated themselves. And so they agree with what we're doing. It's just the main pushback for them is the fiscal impact. So it's, again, going to be a lot of what Emily was saying is convincing them that this is an investment that's very necessary for what we're doing. And then as we move forward, a big part of our process has been reaching out to people that know more than us. And so we are going to be continuing to get feedback on our bill and, we're open to making changes as we move forward to get it passed. And then the big thing that we're really excited for on the grassroots side is that lobbying begins. And so that's going to be a lot of reaching out to key legislators. We have a list of targets that we're going to be hopefully setting up meetings with soon and getting them on board to make sure that they're going to get our bill out of committee and then vote for us when it hits the floor. And then besides setting up those lobby meetings, we're also going to be doing other grassroots efforts like letters to the editor of newspapers in the area, potentially in-person, virtual protests, depending on the COVID situation, and then petitions, calling and letter writing, and testifying in the MGA ourselves. So all that's going to be upcoming shortly, and we're really excited to get students involved with that process and make sure our voices are heard.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so next steps with CCAN. Our bill, like I said, will be introduced on the first day of session. We have full coalition meetings on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. So if your schedule allows, we'd love to have you. And we also have local cuddle halls during the week. We have them right now scheduled for Anne Arundel, Montgomery County, Howard County, and Baltimore, the Baltimore area. if you are from a region that's not represented, but you really want to talk to other people, we're also really open to scheduling more. And I also haven't mentioned much about our coalition. So we recently became the top priority of the Maryland Legislative Coalition, which is a really, really large grassroots coalition that has membership across the state. So they've been adding a lot of grassroots power to our bill. And then in addition to that, we also became the top priority of the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, which is a convening of a number of grass tops kind of groups. As well as some grassroots groups, but primarily grass tops groups. If you don't know what I mean by that, grassroots is sort of more like volunteer basis, whereas a grass tops group would be kind of more paid staffers and nonprofits. The Grass Tops Coalition includes Chesapeake Bay Foundation is really in favor of our bill, especially because of the tree planting, the League of Conservation Voters, Interfaith Power and Light, and a number of other large organizations that you might be familiar with. So there's a kind of a statewide convening of all of those groups, and they picked the Climate Solutions Now as their top priority. So that's a really exciting opportunity. So we have, if you want to like kind of see this really high-powered coalition meeting and deciding on strategy, really informative meetings on Tuesdays at 10. Oh, I did not edit this. So we're going to be talking in Annapolis tomorrow, and we'll be doing that. We do plan to do that during the session. So since we can't meet with the legislators directly, we want to go to Annapolis and physically chalk like the streets to share our climate message. We were going to go tomorrow, but due to the heightened security concerns, we decided that showing up randomly was not the move. So we will be doing that, just not tomorrow. Join us for Lobby Week, sign and share our petition, get your organization to, we have a resolution in favor of our bill. That's something else you can do. Lots of opportunities. So to stay in touch, we have contact information for both of our groups. Natalia is actually going to share that in the chat. MSCAC has a GroupMe, a Google form to stay involved, and then an Instagram. And at CCAN, we also have a Google group that you can sign up through using our form. And we have a Slack workspace, which is where we are doing a lot of our communication. And you can also follow us on Instagram. So Natalia will put that in the chat in just a moment. And it will also be sent to you if you RSVP for the event. It will be sent to you an email as well as a follow-up. And just one last quick plug. So CCAN, we have a kind of a new youth ambassador program. The goal of our youth ambassadors is to be liaisons between CCAN and local youth organizations. Just recognizing that like a lot of, the youth groups, they have their own agency, and we want to make sure that we're working in partnership with them while, discussing our priorities, but also making sure that we're in touch with the priorities of local youth organizations. So you might be a good fit for that if you can commit to 2 to 3 hours a week. If you already are or would like to be a member of another local youth organization, if you have a strong interest in state level climate policy, and if you want to build your resume and volunteer experience. So you can contact me at my email, which you will get again in that follow-up email. Directly if you'd like to be involved. And actually on the call today, we do have our youth coordinator, Andy Miller, who is gonna introduce themselves and just say a little bit about their time working with CCAN. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my name's Andy, and I've been doing some outreach with CCAN for a few months now. And yeah, we're just really looking for liaison roles like Emily mentioned, and yeah, it's a really great time organizing with Emily and also in parallel with MSCAC. So yeah, so please do get in touch if you're in another group, or like Emily said, if you want to be in another group, then you can just be that connection between CCAN and that other group. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much. Okay, with our last little bit of time, we're gonna take some more questions. Okay, I'll take one per bill. How does CCAN plan to identify the specific communities that get a percentage of future climate funding? So in our bill, we do have some parameters that the bill will be, the commission will be required to look at, such as our communities that have been historically, subject to racial discrimination. That's the top one. Communities that face outsized climate impacts, such as communities out on the Eastern Shore and communities, facing urban heat island effect, low income communities, and a couple of other parameters. So we will be making sure that at least some parameters are considered, but we'll also be looking at, some of the same information that the MaryPIRG bill is actually looking at as well. So then the listening sessions, there's a requirement for where they have to be hosted, and it has to be like some of them have to be in rural areas, some of them have to be in urban areas. So we want to we'll be making sure that they are actually accessible. And in addition to that, there has to be representation on the commission from communities that are impacted. And that some of that is actually listed out as well. Some of the same parameters of there has to be at least one representative from a historically racially discriminated community, has to be somebody from a climate impacted community, has to be somebody from a low income community. And there's also requirements around rural and urban representation as well. So there's a lot of different strategies that are going into making sure that we're listening to the right people when it comes to creating that definition. And then there's another question. Does anyone from MSCAC have tips on how to recruit students at our schools or to lobby or make calls?
Yeah, so something that we found really helpful is to first be patient, because building a coalition does not happen overnight. And so we started out with a few students and then kept reaching out to other student organizations who had similar goals as us, or people reached out to their personal friends who they thought might be interested in what we were doing. And just over time, we found a lot of really great and passionate students who have been really dedicated to what we're doing. So yeah, I would say like reaching out to student organizations that fall in line with your goals are a really good way to find people. Also reaching out to professors and asking them to reach out to students that they know that might be interested. Yeah, and just again, like going slowly and not getting discouraged, because it does take a lot of active effort.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, we are at 8 o'clock. So if you have additional questions, please follow up with us. Happy to answer any that come up. But thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. I really appreciate all of the work that you all do. And, our movement is only going to get stronger with just from the youth activists I know. I'm just really confident in the direction of the climate movement generally. So just thank you for all the time that you dedicate. Please do what you can to stay safe and take care of yourself. We're going to have a lot to do, but we want you to participate and stay healthy. So just thank you. But I'm going to respect everybody's time and let us wrap up. But we really hope you stay in touch and definitely be on the lookout for our contact information after the event. So thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. It was great to see you all here today.